Ja, guten Abend und herzlich willkommen zum zweiten musikalischen Online-Salon. Das war ein etwas ruppiger Start, aber offensichtlich gibt es Sachen, die habe ich technisch noch nicht verstanden. Ich probiere sie dreimal aus und sie klappen und dann ist der musikalische Online-Salon und sie klappen nicht. Gut, aber wir haben jetzt eine Lösung gefunden. Ich hatte das in meiner Einladungsmail schon geschrieben.
Willst du nicht auf Englisch reden? Willst du nicht auf Englisch reden, wegen den Gästen?
Gleich. So eine Veranstaltung im Internet ist ja grundsätzlich international. Die letzte Veranstaltung war vor allem in Deutsch, da hatte ich angeboten, dass ich auch auf Englisch übersetze. Diesmal wird die Grundsprache Englisch sein und wer will, kann aber auch zwischendrin sich einmischen und mich bitten, irgendwas zu übersetzen. Dann werde ich das auch tun. Gut, es gibt das noch als letztes auf Deutsch, dann schalte ich erstmal auf Englisch um. Es gibt ja auch den YouTube-Stream. Es gibt die Möglichkeit, sich aus dem Stream auch immer noch in die Zoom-Konferenz einzuklinken. Ich werde gleich noch also das mache ich jetzt sofort, bevor ich Englisch rede, den Zoom-Link noch in den Chat vom Stream schreiben. Dann kann man dazukommen. Wie gesagt, man muss ja auch gar nicht reden, wenn man in der Konferenz dabei ist. Aber wenn man dabei ist, kann man eben auch mal was sagen oder eine Frage stellen oder einen Kommentar abgeben oder was auch immer. Gut, das kommt jetzt.
Nein, von den Bungers.
Nej, det är mensen.
Ik zou het kunnen wel horen.
Niet zo te nemen.
So, jetzt ist für alle Neuen, die gerade zuschauen, der Link zu Zoom auch verfügbar. Okay, good evening. Hello everyone and welcome to my second Musikalischer Online Salon. I'm very glad you joined us. The idea is I'm playing a piece by Roberto Agostinho in the beginning. Then he will tell us something about algorithmic composing. And then the talk is open to everyone. No matter if you are a musician or a composer or just a listener. And this goes on for about 50 minutes. And then in the end, I play another version of Jamais Vu by Roberto to finish the evening and to finish it with some music again. Yeah, also in English, this event is streamed in YouTube. If you watch it on YouTube and you think you would like to ask a question, or if you didn't understand something correctly, just log into the Zoom conference. In the chat you can find the link, and yeah, feel free to take part in the talk. I offer to all German-speaking persons that I might translate something from German to English or from English to German, but the basic language will be English. Okay, so I start with Jamais Vu D, and then we go on.
Bravo.
Bravo, Matthias.
Thanks. So I'm sorry, it's just called conference software and not concert software. Okay, Gilberto.
Yes. Can everyone hear me fine? Fantastic. So I prepared a short text where I just describe a little bit of what I do as a composer and what this piece is about. So we just heard Matthias performing my composition Jamais Vu, written in 2017. Or more specifically, what we heard is one of the infinitely many versions that this composition can take form of. This is because Jamais Vu differs from a traditional piece of instrumental music. It does not exist as a fixed score in which the notes remain the same at every execution, but rather as a set of rules and constraints that can be used to construct the piece in different variations. These rules used to create this piece incorporate some probabilistic elements so that when generating the score, multiple possible results become possible, although all of them respect the original design created by myself. In other words, I specify the structure and behavior of the musical elements of this composition, and then I let an algorithm fill in the details, strictly following those rules I created. Algorithms are nothing more than a series of step-by-step instructions aimed at achieving a certain concrete goal. Although we often associate algorithms with computers, they're also present in the human world. A cooking recipe is one such example. A cook follows several specific steps in order to bake a cake. Another example is how we teach children how to do mathematical operations such as adding two numbers together. First, you need to align the two numbers from their rightmost digits. Then you add each of these vertical digits together, carrying over the results to the next column if it's larger than 9. Anything that can be broken down into a series of step-by-step instructions are, by definition, an algorithm. The main difference between these analog algorithms and the ones executed by computers is thus not one of kind, but rather one of degree. A computer can calculate and execute commands at extraordinary speeds, making it possible for algorithms to become increasingly complex. In the case of Jamais Vu, this means that, at least in theory, it would be possible to follow these rules by hand in order to create a version of the piece without the help of a computer. One could, for instance, use a coin or a die to help with the random selections. In reality, though, this is completely unfeasible. The number of steps that make up the piece is so large that the time frame necessary to create it by hand transcends what is humanly possible. This is, for me, one of the main attractions of working with algorithmic music, a field I have been exploring since 2012. The computer enables us to achieve results that would not be possible without it. As just mentioned, one of the reasons for this is purely technical. A computer can implement procedures infinitely faster than a human being, allowing a degree of technical complexity that would not be feasible, would not be possible if these works were implemented by hand. But to focus solely on this technical aspect is to miss the most important element of working with algorithmic music. The computer allows the composer to discover new sonic worlds that would not have been thought of without using them. There is a quote by J.M. Cooking that I find very profound. He writes, "We shape our tools and thereafter they shape us." This notion that the tools we choose will also shape our artistic works is very important for composers such as myself, who make use of computers as a fundamental element in their compositional process. Naively, one could think that algorithmic composers use computers solely as a way of speeding up their compositional process. In this case, computers are mere facilitators that help us achieve our predefined goals, such as carrying out an enormous amount of calculations that would be too tedious or too time-consuming to be realized by hand. Although it's certainly possible to use computers in such a way, this is by far a much less interesting approach in my opinion. For me, one of the main motivations of working the way I do is the ability to explore these new sonic worlds that are opened up by the use of computers. Once we start to work with algorithms, our ideas shift to, that is, the tools shape us. Fundamentally, we start to think algorithmically. This in turn affects the way we conceive musical material and music procedures too, as this cannot be separated from the algorithmic process that will be applied to them. When I compose, I create materials that will enhance the algorithmic procedures I'm interested in, but I choose my algorithmic procedures thinking of specific materials which will be modified by them. These are all connected and intrinsic parts of my musical thinking. Although the use of randomness is not a requirement for working with algorithms, virtually all my work employs some degree of chance. When dealing with algorithmic systems that cannot put different versions of a work, a term commonly used for the music created is generative music. Jamais Vu is one of such generative works, as its systems can produce an infinite number of different versions of the same piece at the press of a button. You can think of any single version of this composition as a slice of an infinitely long tape that contains all other possible versions, even though they have not all been realized as musical scores. Each version of Jamais Vu will thus sound different and unique, even though they are all, in fact, the same work. This is the idea which the title is alluding to. In psychology, the term jamais vu, French for never seen, is often described as the opposite of déjà vu. Jamais vu is the sense of eeriness or unfamiliarity to something that rationally we should know or have already experienced. At the end of today's event, this is exactly what you experience. You listen to the same work for a second time, and every single note in it will be different than the first time. And that's all we have.
Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you.
So, any questions?
Yes, I have a question. It was a little bit fast to understand every detail. Do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, René. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so maybe you can explain us just from little parts of the piece, where are the differences from one version to the other version? I don't know if it's possible that Matthias maybe plays one little part and then the other part, and then you say what is exactly the difference, so that we can appreciate then the difference of the versions. Okay.
Do you want to give an example, Matthias, or answer that?
Sure. I mean, I did a bit like that in that preview video, but I make it even shorter. So, both of these versions start with a piano. The version D I just played starts like this. And version E starts. So from my part, the common thing is that we have this, we have the short notes and the longer notes, but one piece starts with the longer ones and then later on come the short ones. And the other one is just the other way around. It starts with the short notes and then are some longer notes. So obviously, I mean, it's really difficult to reconstruct the rules when you just see the score. But obviously, we have this two kinds of material: long notes, short notes, and they are chosen by random. After the 5 versions I played, I'm quite sure that the piece starts softer than it ends. But as always with random, even if I saw now we have 6 different steps of dynamics, and the biggest jump I saw so far was by 3 steps. So for instance, from mezzo piano to fortissimo. But still, I wouldn't rely on the fact that it can't be also from piano to fortissimo, maybe with a probability of 0.00001, but maybe it can happen. I'm not sure about that, but I'm quite sure about the fact that it starts softer, and the first fortissimo comes quite late, and usually it ends louder than it started, but not always.
It's really interesting to see you trying to infer what are the rules and what are the procedures behind from the point of view as a performer. I feel almost like not telling some of these answers to you, and just every time that you play the pieces, you get one more piece of the puzzle. But as you correctly said, you can never be sure. This is the thing. Unless you find something that breaks completely the rule, you cannot just assume that that for certain.
Yeah.
But in a nutshell, how this piece works is that I have defined certain types of musical material, but these are not defined. These are defined as rhythms and as gestures rather than specific notes. So the algorithm it has a process of selecting, given the current pitch, what's going to be the next pitch. So you see that when you have the fast parts, they tend to move in steps that are not too large from each other. And so you have these categories of material, but they are defined not very precisely. So it's not like a motif that you have specific pitches and rhythms. Each type of material has a pool of possibilities. So the fast notes have certain possible rhythms, there's certain possible ways of including rests, and certain possible ways of using intervals. And these methods are different than the ones for the longer notes. Something that you might have realized, for instance, Matthias, there is this sense of progression as well, as you said, with the dynamics. Also with the grace notes, the further you go into the piece, the more you have those faster unrhythmic grace notes. So this is also something which is included in the algorithm. But once you put 2 versions side by side, they're going to be absolutely completely different when you look at the details of the notes, if that makes sense.
And it seems to be something about the length, because I mean, I'm always when I'm working on the pieces, I'm once playing them with a metronome and taking the time, and it's always between 4/5 and 4/15, or maybe 4/20, always in the same region. So
yeah, so the algorithm selects us. I think it's a fixed number of little cells, and on average, that's what's going to be the total duration. So you could one day run into a version that is a little bit out of the ordinary and it's substantially longer. For instance, if the algorithm starts to select a lot of those longer chords and longer notes instead of the faster cells. But it's very unlikely you're going to get a piece made out only of those, but it could be there. I think Andrew was wanting to ask something.
Yeah, it might be silly. I'm sorry if it is, but
no, absolutely not a problem.
These algorithms are set in place, aren't they? And they're not moving. It's not like they're affected by the previous choices that are made. It's not like like an evolving thing. It's a set in place thing, and it's the music that filters through and evolves.
So the algorithm, it's fixed in place in the sense that it's the same software that I wrote. I write one software per composition basically, and it's the same application that once you execute, it creates a score. It's the same one creates in the next compositions. But this specific algorithm,
Go on.
I was just going to say that this specific algorithm, it always, when it's selecting a pitch or a duration, it always looks at what happened before. Because one of the reasons I did that for pitch is just to ensure that you don't have a lot of extremely large skips in the cello in the fast, when you're playing very fast, because that would make something unplayable. It's already very difficult as it is. Christine, I think.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
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 It might also be a stupid question maybe, but I'm also wondering, is there any links between the versions as they follow each other? Like, is there a clear link between version A and B, B and C? Is there some kind of some kind of link between them, or is it just a random decision that the algorithm makes?
So the only link between them is how those structures that I was talking about are created. So how the type of material, let's say material A is defined, is the same in every version. How material B is defined, but it's not. But there's no link, I think, as what you're referring to.
So version B would not be looking back to version A?
No, not at all, not at all.
Okay.
So, you have this large tradition of ambient music, right? That you can, a piece of music can run for hours and hours and hours, and it's very repetitive, but it's never really the same. And you can listen to any chunk of that. It's going to be kind of equivalent. That's more or less the philosophical part behind it is very similar to that. It's just that the music is tend to be substantially complex than, say, Brahmin or.
Do you think it could happen? This is more like this Borges thought that one of the versions starts like the first Bach suite, like his huge library where you have all these random books, which include every existing book.
Yeah. So I love this notion of the library of infinite books. So if you have books with 1,000 pages, each page has 400 characters, and these are randomly created. That library contains every single book written with 1,000 pages. Most of it's nonsense. It's a very, very powerful notion that relates to these things that I do. In the specific case that you're saying, I don't think you can get the beginning of the Bach suite, but that's because this piece is not completely random letters. I'm already emphasizing some letters of the alphabet over others.
Okay.
So because you have these constraints that I was talking about. So for instance, you cannot have a skip larger than a certain amount for every X number of notes, as not to have some really impossible skips on the hand. So that already eliminates a lot of types of music. The dynamic thing that you mentioned, that's also correct. I think that 3 degrees is the largest skip you have of dynamic. So any piece that uses 4 degrees or more of dynamic change cannot be. So my interest is to create very specific musical material that you can still recognize, and once you listen to a second or third or fourth version, that you start to say, okay, this sound is Jamais Vu. It is the same work. Even if once you analyze it, the notes are completely different.
I'm also thinking to achieve that, to have that notion of it all being the same work. Do you purposefully tweak the algorithm with every new version that you make, or not? I mean, do you do you know, do you try to achieve that similarity between the pieces, or is it just inherently there in the algorithm? Or do you maybe like to be surprised what comes out of the algorithm? I don't know.
I really love to be surprised. So when I'm working, I'm trying things out. I just see how things are sounding, if the piece is going the direction that I think it's interesting. It's very experimental in a way, because once the algorithm starts to give you results, you can listen to it, and then you can adjust the algorithm and listen and so on. But once I say that, okay, this piece is done, this is the system, that's it basically. And so when I finished this work, when Matthias asked me to compose this for him, I sent him 20 versions already on the email. I did not even check all of them, because that's not the point. They all are part of the work. And I told him I could send as many as he wishes. So yeah.
So in a sense, it's the algorithm is fixed, and whatever comes out of it is.
Yes. In a sense, the algorithm is the work as much as all of these scores are the work. Everything together is the work.
But could you tell the algorithm to write version A again?
Not with the way that I programmed, because you could do this relatively easily. You could say, for instance, you could associate one number with each version. So you just type a bunch of numbers, and then you would release a specific version. So you're basically mapping one number to a version. But I did not do that. It's literally you just press enter, and a PDF comes on the other side. Yeah.
Okay.
So when I'm composing, I tend to fix things just to try to narrow down certain behaviors. And then I remove this limitation and just try things out. How similar do you find the versions, Matthias? You've played now 5 different versions already of the work.
Yeah.
So how similar do you find them to each other, or in terms of does it feel like the same work for you when you perform it?
Well, it's absolutely the same work. But I said it in this preview video. When I start a new version, on the one hand, I think, oh, I know this piece. On the other hand, I think technically it's even more nasty than all the other ones. Which after some work, I realize it's not true. It's just because you became acquainted to the other versions. And this morning, I thought, well, I have to do some cello playing, but I worked so much on version D and E, so I don't have to work on them. So I took version C again, which I played last time in November 2018. And in the view back, it was just the same. It wasn't the same piece. I remembered I had played it before, but I couldn't do it. It was awful. I could play it very slowly, and then I remembered, oh, this is the part where I had to be careful about the C sharp or so. But it wasn't. I could have played in half the tempo or 2/3 of the tempo. But it was amazing, because usually, even if you haven't played a piece for quite a time, your fingers remember what they have to do, but they didn't this morning, unfortunately.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It is quite challenging. It's I think it's always quite something to see you performing. It's always very physical, when it's brilliant to listen to watch. For me, it's always good.
On the other hand, I have the feel, and that also is an aspect of being the same piece. I think I'm playing it better every time, even if I play different versions. And tonight I'm playing version E for the first time, but I'm confident that it's better than how I played version A in the first concert, when I played version A, because even if the piece is different, you know, from the very beginning of your work, you know, I have to focus on this, or I have to focus on that. And special aspects of your work, you already know you have to do them. And that helps, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay, we had so many questions to me, to Gilberto now. I would like to turn the questions around to the four listeners who didn't neither compose nor play these pieces. What did you listen to? What did you hear? If you would like to tell someone tomorrow, oh, I heard this piece by Gilberto, and it was, what would you say?
I'll take that. I would say lyrical. It sounded like a lot of vocal gestures. That's how I was hearing it anyway. It was more the shapes and like Gilberto said, the gestures more than the actual notes. So yeah, I was hearing it in a very phrased kind of lyrical way.
Lyrical. Phrased and lyrical. Amazing.
I like that.
Yeah, I agree with Andrew. It doesn't sound like an algorithm composed it. I mean,
yeah.
It doesn't sound like it's a computer generated work at all. It sounds to me it sounds very lyrical. There's a lot of interesting timbral moments in there as well. A lot of, especially in the second version, a lot of really interesting cluster chords. I thought it was really lyrical as well, even though that feels like a weird way to describe it.
Maybe human is the best way. It had a very human feel, which I assume is part performer, part composer. It was both of you brought that to it, I assume.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think that Matthias' performance really brings out the piece from the page, and it's even though I'm working with computers, I'm still writing instrumental music. This music is to be interpreted, is to be performed by people, is to be on the stage, and this notion that a lot of people might have with computer-generated music, that it should be this necessarily this very cold mechanical approach to music, it's not a necessity. And so I was saying about this very physical way of performing this piece. I absolutely love it, and I do think you're performing it better and better, Matthias. I really enjoy how this piece is sounding every time the more and more as I hear it.
Gilberto, did you have to program or take that into account as you're programming it to make it sound organic and not cold and roboty?
So this is part of the process of composition for me, and it's part of what I was trying to allude to when I was writing the text, that I don't like to approach composition with a specific goal in mind. So it's not as I have a specific piece in mind and it's just a matter of coding. I try things out, I listen to them, I see if it's working. If it's not working, I try then to just use my musical ear to decide why perhaps that's not working, and just try things out. And the number of projects that didn't end up in compositions, it's really, really huge. I have huge folders with algorithms in trash that didn't lead to anything. And so it's a matter of trying things out, tweaking things, seeing the result, going back, and so it's a lot of back and forth. So in a way, yes, the answer is I try in this particular piece. I try to get something very gestural. I wanted to be a demanding soloist piece, and so that was what I was aiming at. And I wanted it to be really, I think what you mentioned, lyrical. That's possibly what what you're alluding to.
Your process is like refreshingly traditional. That doesn't make sense, but for what we think of as computer-generated music and algorithms and all these buzzwords, it's a very traditional human way of creation, isn't it? Not that I prejudged how you were doing things, but yeah,
Sure.
It's nice to hear the human coming out.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think if you look at the score and if you look at the piece, I think that there is something that you look at it and you think that it would be a weird piece for somebody just to write by hand, to just sit down and come up with those specific decisions. So I still believe that the computer becomes part of this aesthetical world of computer music. So you don't have to go for the obvious, overly mechanical approach, but sometimes things are just, sometimes things repeat in weird ways. Sometimes there's juxtapositions that they're interesting exactly because they're unusual. And computers are very good at creating these unusual things because, they don't have, they only have what you put on them. They don't have the whole baggage that you have as a composer when you're trying to create things naturally by hand. So I like to be surprised, and
If the two of you say it's so lyrical, one of the questions for me is, can we trust it that it's really lyrical, or is it just fake lyrical?
I think it's how we're perceiving it. We're adding it sounds like a vocal thing, or it's got these human gestural prosody or contours to the lines. So maybe that's us just putting our baggage onto it.
Ja. René, du hattest gerade noch was? Hattest dich gerade
Yes, a
eingeklinkt?
little question. Do you ever change the algorithmical result afterwards by hand? Does this exist, or do you take it as it is and leave it as it is?
so I used to be more of a purist than I am nowadays. But in general, I don't touch the results. So in this case of this piece, I don't touch absolutely anything. So this is exactly what came out of the algorithm. I think that Matthias can actually share this anecdote that when I sent the piece to him, the idea was that he was going to perform. I proposed him to perform one version at every single public performance, and to just rip that version, throw it in the garbage, and move on to the next. And we quickly realized that it's completely unfeasible. It's too difficult. You can't do that to a performer. So recently, what I tend to do with my compositions is that I choose one single version and they exist in a single version. Nowadays I go through a bunch of those. I select one, and that becomes the single piece. But the system behind it's the same thing as with Jamais Vu. The approach is the same. But I don't change notes. I don't change chords. I would rather change the algorithm itself. Because in a way, creating the algorithm is composing for me, and so recomposing something that is sounding not ideal for me is changing the system.
And when he sent me these pieces, he not only told me that he wanted to have each version played once and then another one, but he said there are 20 versions, and look through them and choose one, and if you don't like them, I'll send you more. Which I thought is funny or strange, because if he creates these 20 versions, there's obviously no criteria to say that's the real one and that's not. So I decided not to make any decisions myself, but I started with A, then took B and C, and now it's D and E, and the next one I'm going to play will be F, of course.
Which I really appreciate, by the way. Yeah, I think that this is the I have worked with performers that are not as open as you are to this kind of music, and I think part of why I mentioned in that email that you could choose one is just to kind of leave the door open in case you found something that in the scores. I think it was coming from that point of view, but I really appreciate the approach of playing them in order, because they are all as valid as one as another.
You know how you said it's part of an infinite, piece of tape that you can just take slices of? Why did you choose a naming format that's limited to 26 letters?
What do you mean?
As in, you've gone A, B, C, D. You've got the letters of the alphabet that ends at Z. It's just arbitrary, presumably.
No, it's just it's just a way to keep track. So the piece is just Jamais Vu. That's it. I call everything Jamais Vu. It's just a way to keep track of what score is which, particularly if you're reperforming them. That's just.
So at the 27th performance, you could go into
I think
AA,
I'll just go double A, double B,
Yeah,
double
yeah.
C, and triple A, triple B, and so on.
I was concerned you'd written yourself into a 26-piece.
Yeah, no, I think you can. Yeah, you can go for more than that. But yeah, Matthias,
Okay,
yeah, sorry.
No. Go on.
I was just going to mention that there is a lot of performers who even work with contemporary music who have issues with the idea that every note of a score has been generated by a computer, and as if there is a lack of care from the composer, as if there is a lack of intention. And I faced this many times. I once had this meeting with Christian Wolff, and he was saying that both him and Cage had this issue that once they were working with algorithms, they would often try not to talk about these things with performer. They just would give the score, and for me, it doesn't make sense because it's a fundamental part of the piece. I need the person playing to understand and have some idea of how this thing is created. So in that sense, this is a very pleasant collaboration, but it's not always this way. And often I find that you have to justify what you do, and people tend to be overly picky with the score, which they're not with composers that write by hand. Just a small anecdote.
Well, but you also have advantages. For instance, with the double stops here, obviously the rule is we have one open string and one pitch on another string. So all of them are like...
Matthias,
Ja?
bevor du spielst, guck noch mal dein Mikrofon. Ich höre dich nur auf einem Kanal und ziemlich leise.
Also sie sind beide gleich eingestellt.
Das ist besser.
Ist besser?
Ja.
Dann war vielleicht noch irgendein Doppelkontakt. Okay. Gut, also we have always one open string and one other pitch added to that. And that works out every time, but physical composers tend to make mistakes, and one of the very famous mistakes is to write double stop with this note and this note, which you can't play on the cello because in a double stop one note has to be at least this one or higher, and mistakes like this don't happen in an algorithmic composition, at least if the composer thought about it.
Yeah, so it's exactly if the composer, take these things into consideration. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That's how the algorithm works. It was a safe way of working with multiple stops. I could try to write something a bit more complex. I had written a piece for guitar that instead of working with pitches, I work with finger positions. And so I try to make a model for the human hand. So how many stops can the pinky finger go? How many stops can these ones go? And then the combination becomes the pitch selection. So I'm actually selecting the pitches according to what is possible on the instrument. So as long as my guesses of how a human hand holds a guitar works, those should be playable.
Yeah. Okay, if we take still more 5 or 10 minutes, I would like to discuss a thing I just mentioned a bit in the preview video, but it's still going on in my mind all the time, and it would be interesting to have the thoughts of others too. That's about the ordinary chords that appear in the version E. I'm playing a spoiler of the end of the, well, close to the end, and I play it a bit slower and also a bit with a bit softer notes, so it's easier to hear. So we have this that, well, Jamais Vu just sounds like Jamais Vu always sounds. Then we have this G major chord going to a D major 7th chord. So this I said it mentioned it in my preview video just shortly, but by now I'm sure it's not D major and it's not D major. It just sounds like it. Because so far I think if you really want to compose D major, you have to understand what G major is, and G major is a cultural thing, and G, D, and B is not a cultural thing. That's just 3 different pitches. But to call it G major is a cultural thing, and the algorithm, at least the one that Gilberto uses in this piece, doesn't know anything about G major. So he absolutely can't compose G major. He just can compose, or it can just compose something that sounds like G major. That's what I think by now about it, but I would be interested to hear what others think about it. And maybe I'm wrong. If you say it's true lyrical, you might also say, Andrew, it's true G major.
No, I think I agree with you, because the context isn't set up for this terminology, so there's no need to call it G major. Therefore, it's not G major because it doesn't need to be. It can be if we go back to analyze and we want to analyze in a certain way, but until that is necessary, which in this context, this context is not necessary. Yeah, why give it a name?
Yeah, but still, I think if Gilberto had composed this piece by hand and would have written the same notes, it would be something different. It's not just part of the context, I think, because if he would have written GDB, he couldn't write that without thinking, oh, I'm composing G major.
Mm-hmm. And that would affect what he did before and afterwards. Yeah.
I'm sure. I think so.
The thing is that this G major chord has a meaning in opposite to other combinations of tones. This is the question behind, maybe, as I understand it. Is that what you thought about, Gilberto?
I'm really thinking about what Matthias just said. So I think Matthias' argument is that if there's no intention, that's not a major or minor chord. That's just random pitches. And I kind of like this idea. But on the other hand, yes, we as listeners, we care this cultural baggage. We have centuries of tonal music in our backs. So when we hear those combinations, our brains flag it as that sounds something I recognize. But yeah, Matthias is right. The algorithm knows nothing of tonal chords.
But does it know? Does the algorithm know about tension and release? And I guess that's to do with our cultural understanding of what is
this one.
Release.
Not this one, but you could write one that that takes those things into consideration, but not this particular one. There is a tension arc in this piece that the volume becomes louder. You start to have more of those grace notes that give the physical part of playing the cello becomes even stronger because they're very fast. but it's not tension as in tension in release. It's just raising tension, basically. And so
not harmonic tension in how we might think about other forms, other parameters. Yeah. It's interesting.
But it remains a little bit a danger that it turns to another meaning if you put in this meaningful chords of tradition. Don't you fear that it could express then something different that the rest of the piece expresses?
I understand your point, René. Absolutely I do. For me, it's something that it's these are just some kind of interesting moments that are created by this randomness, and I find them actually fascinating. I think that they don't sound tonal to me because the context of what's coming around them is very dissonant. The cello is playing in a very it's fairly aggressive. It's with these fast notes and rhythms. I don't think that you hear that and you think, aha, that's a cadenza. You know, that's going from a dominant to a tonic. Sorry, the opposite. So I find it actually fascinating when these little things appear in these versions. It's one of the quirks that, as Matthias said, I don't think a composer writing by hand would have done that, and I like these little surprises.
And this must be because you wash, by using an algorithmic system, you wash your hands of cultural, tradition. You have to, because, or certainly in terms of pitch. In other senses, you have complete control, or some degree of control.
Yeah, I think freedom.
Ja.
Darf ich auf Deutsch reden? Vielleicht muss es jemand übersetzen.
Ich übersetze es.
Das Problem dieses Stückes ist ja, dass man als Hörer, gut, man kann es vielleicht auf zwei verschiedene Weisen hören. Die eine Methode ist sozusagen wie eine Tapete, ein Hintergrund, den man nicht weiter analysiert. Ich höre das mehr strukturell und bin in diesem Stück ununterbrochen auf der Suche nach Anknüpfungspunkten, nach Dingen, die mich, nach Beziehungen, die innerhalb dieses Stückes entstehen oder natürlich auch in Beziehung zu anderen Stücken, die ich kenne. Und da ist natürlich so ein Akkord ist auffällig, aber er verschwindet wieder. Und aber solche Punkte gibt es massenhaft in diesem Stück. Also das ist keineswegs nur diese beiden Akkorde oder sowas, sondern es sind ganz andere Stücke auch, die erinnern an bestimmte Stellen, an andere Dinge, die ich gehört habe. Und alles das verschwindet im Laufe des Stückes, sodass davon eigentlich fast nichts übrig bleibt. Es sind so kleine Momente, die mich immer wieder auf Holzwege führen, die dahin führen, dass ich denke, ah ja, das klingt jetzt danach, und dann ist es im nächsten Moment schon wieder weg und es ist was anderes.
Okay, I translate. Christine, Andrew is better. I think Gilberto, you got the overall meaning.
Yeah.
Okay, but I just translate. So Friedemann said there are two different ways of listening to this piece. The one is to take it just like a wallpaper and it's happening and you let it pass by. The other way, and that's his way of listening to it, is a more structural one. So you're listening to the piece and trying all the time to get some links, to get some relationships between certain parts. And he said that of course these G major or pseudo G major is one point where you really it's really a strong point, and you realize it and you try to find relationships to other points, and then but there are also a lot of other things, not just these harmonic points, but also gestural sounds or all kinds of things that link it to, or that make him remember music he heard before. But all this passes by. You never really get one part linked to the other one. So it feels a bit like always sent in the wrong direction, being sent in the wrong direction, and then coming back. Und Friedemann, gerade noch eine Frage an dich zur Vervollständigung. Ist es jetzt, ist es zum Hören eher angenehm oder ist es eher unangenehm oder ist es halt, wie es ist?
Also die Frage angenehm oder unangenehm kann ich dir nicht beantworten. Das hängt von dem Hörer ab, schätze ich mal. Ich bin ein Hörer, der hört sehr gerne Dinge, die er noch nicht kennt. Und das ist natürlich ein Stück, wo man ständig auf der Suche ist. Für manche Leute ist das eine Qual, glaube ich. Für mich nicht.
Yeah. Okay, so I just asked if this aspect of always having links leading to nowhere, if that's agreeable or if it's disagreeable. He said, well, of course it's different for every listener, but he likes this aspect that you always feel it could be linked to another part of the piece, and then realize, oh no, it's not.
I think this is something that I find really interesting. That when we're listening to music, we are looking for structure. We are looking for things. We can't just let sounds come in. We're always comparing those. You know, we have our critical brains. We're looking for patterns. Absolutely. So we're looking for patterns, and this is one of the things that is so interesting for me with this randomly generated music, or randomly generated images, or randomly generated whatever. We look for these patterns, and once we find them, we start to find these microstructures, and I think that this sense of disorientation, of constantly renewing it, things are constantly changing, and then you grab something and this something went away, and then you test a theory. Okay, so maybe these things are connected that way, and then you listen to something different. This for me is part of what makes this sort of music interesting. The listener is just thrown there, and there is all these things hitting them, and they are just trying to make sense of that. So I understand, and myself as a listener, I include myself like that. I'm also finding these things, and which is why I find super fascinating that we have this almost tonal sequence there.
Friedemann, du wolltest nochmal?
Ja, nochmal. Das ist übrigens ein Punkt, an dem wir jetzt sind, wo ich auch diesem Begriff des Lyrischen nicht wirklich entsprechen kann. Das Lyrische hat für mich eine andere Art von Verbindung. Das lebt davon, dass es eine semantische Beziehung aufbaut. Und auch diese Frage, deine Frage, Matthias, nach dem Angenehm oder Unangenehm, wenn ich das frage mal nach dem Vergnügen. Das Vergnügen ist natürlich in dem Moment, wo diese Anknüpfungspunkte nicht einfach nur verschwinden, sondern auch eine Bedeutung gewinnen sozusagen. Dann ist das Vergnügen schon höher als bei diesem Stück, wo man eigentlich ständig sucht und bei der Suche bleibt.
Okay, so he just said about this word lyrical or lyrisch, but I'm not sure if lyrisch is really the translation of lyrical, although it sounds so similar. That for him, lyrisch would need really a connection between the different parts, and that when I asked him did he enjoy this being led in wrong directions all the time, that in a way, of course, he enjoys, or the aspect of delight is bigger if a piece also fulfills relationships, so that you can really realize, oh, we are here and now we are there, and we're here because we had been there.
I think that this is something.
As far as
sorry.
which as far as I understood you, Friedemann, so wie ich dich verstanden habe, heißt es ja nicht, dass du dieses Stück nicht magst, sondern nur, dass dieser Aspekt des Vergnügens größer ist, wenn es die Verbindung gibt. Which is, of course, nothing against your piece. It's just this aspect of delight is different in other pieces.
I think that it's just as a comment about algorithmic music in general. You could very easily impose a direction and impose these relationships. So it's this aspect that you're discussing actually reflect my own musical taste and my own musical aesthetics, rather than the fact that it's generated by a computer. You can have a computer music with a very clear directionality. It goes from A to B to C. It uses fixed structures. It could be tonal if the material uses tonal. But I myself, I'm interested in this lack of the directionality. I really like this non-goal oriented approach to art. And I think that says much more about myself as a composer than it does, about the fact that it's composed with the aid of a computer. Let's put it like that.
Okay, we're just already a bit longer than an hour. So I would suggest we come to the performance of Jamais Vu E now, just to round up the evening. And of course, no one has to turn out the computer after that. So we can go on talking. I just have to look in the stream. But for all the people who scheduled an hour for this and who want to listen to Jamais Vu E, we should start with that now. Is it okay?
Absolutely.
And I'll make a recording of it. Better one than...
Bravo.
Okay, thank you, Roberto, for this lovely music. Thanks everyone else for listening, for being part in the Zoom conference. The next event will be on March 9th with Yannis Xenakis, Nomos Alpha, and Wolfgang Bosse talking about music and determinism. And a week before, I'll release the preview video, and everything is published on my homepage, and I send emails and everything. So I enjoyed this again very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Matthias. Really appreciate, and yeah, thanks everyone for coming and for the questions and lovely comments. Really appreciate it. And thank you for performing the piece. I really appreciate it as well.
That was a pleasure. Okay, noch kurz auf Deutsch. Also das war der zweite musikalische Online-Salon. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen, vielen Dank fürs Beteiligtsein an der Konferenz. In 3 Wochen geht es weiter am 9. März mit Nomos Alpha von Yannis Xenakis, und Wolfgang Bosse redet über Determinismus in der Musik. Und eine Woche vorher, am 2. März, also gibt es wie immer das Preview-Video, und auf meiner Homepage sind alle Details.